The church bells rang hollow that winter morning, their echoes rolling over Montgomery like a warning no one wanted to hear. In the convent on the edge of town, whispers spread faster than hymns, whispers about silence in the cloisters where once there had been song. People said that the sisters had not left, yet they could no longer be seen in the gardens, nor heard chanting in the chapel at dawn. The Mother Superior insisted that all was well, that they had been called away to serve elsewhere. But the townsfolk, uneasy and restless, felt something unspeakable had occurred behind those locked gates. Dr. Elias Hargrove, the town's physician, kept his observations carefully folded in a journal he never showed to anyone. He was a practical man, grounded in science and wary of superstition, yet the convent unsettled him more than any illness or injury he had treated. He had been summoned there once under urgent pretenses, only to find nothing visibly wrong. The request had been vague, the faces strained, and when he pressed for details, the Mother Superior's expression turned cold and final. He left with no patient to examine, only the echo of footsteps trailing him to the gate. He later admitted to himself that her eyes had carried something close to fear, but not for herself. At first, the townspeople tried to explain away the absence of the sisters. They assumed the women had been reassigned, perhaps sent north under wartime necessity. But then the dreams began. Farmers' wives woke screaming, convinced they had heard muffled cries beneath the floorboards. A blacksmith swore he felt a hand touch his shoulder in the night, though no one stood beside him. And Dr. Hargrove's own young niece described in detail a vision of women in habits, pressing their palms against unseen walls, their mouths open in soundless prayers. She had never stepped foot in the convent, yet her account matched the strange reports whispered from household to household. By February, Montgomery was gripped by an unease that deepened with every night's rest. The townsfolk grew afraid of sleep itself, certain they would meet those pale figures in their dreams. "This is mass hysteria," Hargrove wrote in his journal, though his hand trembled as he underlined the words. Still, he could not dismiss the pattern. Too many separate accounts, too many consistent details. He began to wonder whether grief, guilt, or some collective memory was weaving itself into visions. And yet, some small voice in his mind whispered of a possibility he dared not name. The true shift came when a mason repairing a wall near the convent claimed to hear knocking beneath the ground, rhythmic and persistent. He fled his work and refused to return, swearing that the sound followed him for days afterward, like an echo lodged in his skull. Most dismissed him as fevered, but others remembered his words when their own nights grew restless. Dr. Hargrove, though reluctant, began asking quiet questions in town. Had anyone seen the sisters leave? Had anyone received letters from them? Each inquiry was met with hesitation, silence, or hurried denial. In his notes, he underlined the same sentence 3 times. Absence can be hidden, but presence leaves its shadow. He could not ignore that the convent seemed too quiet, too orderly, as though silence itself had been curated. That kind of silence, he thought, was not natural. It was imposed. On a rain-slick evening in March, Hargrove passed the convent on his way back from a patient's home. He swore he saw a pale hand at one of the upper windows, pressed flat against the glass, vanishing before he could blink. He stopped, staring upward, but no figure remained. He told no one that night, but his journal carried the words heavy as confession. They are still there. And yet he knew that writing it was one thing, proving it was another. What science could explain an absence that still lingered as presence in dreams? The last line he wrote that night carried the weight of all his dread. If they are still there, then someone placed them where no prayer can reach. Dr. Elias Hargrove stared at that sentence until the ink blurred. He wondered if he had gone too far, if exhaustion had bent his reason into superstition, and yet the hand at the window haunted him more than any fever patient or battlefield wound he had ever treated. He was a man of medicine, but he could not deny what he had seen, or what so many had whispered in his ear. Something lingered behind the convent walls, unseen but not absent, silenced but not gone. By morning he resolved to speak with the mason who had abandoned his work. He found him at a tavern, hunched over, with a face ashen as plaster dust. The man's eyes darted about as though some invisible presence followed close. At first he refused to speak, but Hargrove pressed him, invoking the oath of a doctor sworn to confidentiality. Finally, in a low rasp, the mason confessed that the knocking beneath the ground had not been random. It had been deliberate, like code. He swore he felt the vibrations travel through the stone, reverberating up his arm as he worked. "It wasn't echoes," he muttered, "it was pleas." Hargrove left unsettled. The rational part of him sought to explain it away, soil shifting, water swelling beneath foundations, but the man's trembling hands betrayed conviction, not invention. He could not simply dismiss it, and when he returned home, his niece startled him by waking from another night terror. Between sobs, she insisted the same pale women pressed at her window, mouthing prayers she could not hear. He soothed her as best he could, though her words chilled him more deeply than the winter air. The following Sunday, townsfolk gathered for Mass at the convent chapel. The Mother Superior led the service with a composed dignity, yet her eyes scanned the pews as if measuring doubt. Hargrove watched her closely, noting the tremor in her hands as she turned the pages of Scripture. She spoke of obedience, of sacrifice, of the silence of the saints. But when he asked afterward about the sisters who were absent, she cut him off with a firm smile and a phrase he would never forget. "Silence is the highest devotion." It was not an answer, it was a warning. That evening, Hargrove took a solitary walk near the convent. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, and thunder muttered like a restless spirit. He paused by the garden wall and thought he heard faint voices, indistinct but layered, weaving in and out like a hymn caught in wind. The sound stopped abruptly when a lantern flared near the chapel door. A cloaked figure, surely the Mother Superior, moved swiftly back inside, as if caught in an act that could not bear witness. He recorded every detail in his journal, though he struggled to decide whether he was documenting events or sliding into delusion. Still, the words formed under his pen. If silence is devotion, then whose silence has been demanded? The next day brought the first open sign of fear among the townsfolk. A young soldier's widow burst into Hargrove's practice, pale and frantic, insisting that she woke to find dirt on her bedroom floor, though she had locked her windows. She swore she heard whispering in the dark, voices repeating her name. She begged Hargrove for medicine to keep her awake, claiming that sleep was no longer safe. He gave her laudanum, but he knew it would not ease what plagued her. Medicine could numb the body, but not dreams. By April, the air in Montgomery itself felt heavier, as though the whole town labored under an unseen weight. Crops withered, tempers flared, and children refused to sleep alone. Every conversation circled back to the convent, but no one dared speak openly of what they feared. Hargrove began to see that the question was no longer whether something had happened there. The question was how long the truth could remain buried. One night, restless and unable to ignore the pull, he returned to the convent gates. His heart pounded as he pressed his ear to the iron bars. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, faint and muffled, he heard it, 3 slow knocks from somewhere deep within the earth. He stepped back, chilled to the marrow, as a thought formed with dreadful clarity. If those knocks were real, then someone inside still sought to be heard. Dr. Elias Hargrove repeated the thought as he walked home under the dim glow of lanterns. Each echo of his boots on the cobblestones felt like an answer, as if the ground itself mocked his reluctance. He wanted to tell himself it was only his imagination, but the rhythm of those knocks had been too deliberate, too human. And if they truly came from beneath the convent, then silence no longer meant absence, it meant concealment. The following day, Hargrove confided in Reverend Matheson, a man known for his steady manner and faith untainted by hysteria. The Reverend listened in silence as Hargrove described the sounds, the pale hand, and the townspeople's dreams. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured but troubled. A convent is a house of God, but men and women build its walls, and what men build, men can corrupt. His words did not soothe Hargrove. Instead, they deepened the suspicion already taking root. The Reverend agreed to accompany him to the convent under the guise of a pastoral visit. Together they knocked at the heavy wooden doors, and once again it was the Mother Superior who answered. Her calmness seemed rehearsed, her smile a mask stitched too tightly. She welcomed them inside, but every corner they passed felt staged, as though prepared for inspection. When Matheson inquired gently about the missing sisters, she replied with the same chilling composure. They are in silence, and silence is their service. Hargrove felt a rising unease. As he glanced down a dim corridor, he noticed a door at the far end chained shut. Its iron links rusted but sturdy. The Mother Superior intercepted his gaze with a sharpness that cut through her calm. "That part of the convent is closed for repairs," she said quickly, before leading them toward the chapel. Yet, even as hymns echoed faintly from a nearby chamber, Hargrove thought he heard something else beneath it, a muffled thrum, like voices restrained by walls too thick for prayer to pass through. The moment lodged itself deep in his mind. That night, he wrote in his journal, "If silence is chosen, it is holy. If silence is forced, it is a grave." The first true fracture came soon after. A farmer's boy, not more than 10, wandered into town claiming he had seen women in habits standing in his field at dusk. They did not speak, but their mouths moved in unison, their faces pale as if lit from below. When he called out, they vanished, leaving only flattened patches in the tall grass. His father dismissed it as childish fancy, but neighbors whispered it confirmed what many already feared, that the sisters were not gone, but transformed into something caught between presence and absence. Hargrove collected each account like a surgeon studying symptoms, charting a pattern that grew darker by the week. Dreams of suffocation, hands reaching from shadows, whispered names spoken in empty rooms. It was as though the convent's silence seeped outward, poisoning the town's very sleep. Driven by a mixture of fear and duty, Hargrove returned alone to the convent wall one evening, carrying only a lantern. The storm clouds above swirled like a wound in the sky. He pressed close to the chained door he had glimpsed days before. For long minutes he heard nothing, only the drip of rain. Then faintly came a sound so fragile he almost doubted it. 3 knocks, followed by silence, then 3 more. His pulse thundered. It was not the random settling of stone. It was a signal. He whispered into the dark, uncertain whether he sought answers or only his own madness. "If someone hears me, knock again." For several heartbeats, there was nothing. Then the sound came back, stronger, closer, as though something beneath the floor had answered. Hargrove staggered backward, lantern trembling in his grip. His mind raced with 2 unbearable possibilities. Either the dead were refusing to rest, or the living had been sealed away, where daylight could not reach. Dr. Elias Hargrove walked home with that sentence echoing louder than the storm above him. It clung to him like the damp air, seeping into every corner of his reason. If the knocks were born of the dead, then Montgomery was haunted by sins too great to name. But if the living still lingered beneath the convent floor, then an even darker truth had taken root, one that implicated not the supernatural but human hands. By morning, Hargrove's unease had hardened into resolve. He sought counsel from Reverend Matheson again, determined to share the knocks he had heard at the chained door. The Reverend listened intently, though his face grew pale. "You are suggesting something grave," Matheson said carefully, "and if you are right, then we are speaking not of ghosts, but of cruelty." His hesitation revealed fear, not only of the convent, but of the consequences should the truth come out. Yet Matheson agreed to accompany him once more. Together they walked to the convent under the guise of routine visitation. This time, however, Hargrove guided the Reverend deliberately toward the chained door. To their dismay, it was gone. The corridor where it had been now ended in a freshly plastered wall, the surface too smooth, too perfect, as if someone had worked through the night to erase what had once stood there. The Mother Superior appeared before they could linger, her presence sudden and sharp. She did not scold, but her eyes held a warning glint. "There are places here," she said in a tone that chilled them both, "that are not meant for wandering." With that, she guided them back toward the chapel, her composure unbroken, her authority absolute. Later that evening, Hargrove scrawled in his journal until his hand cramped. If the door is gone, then what lies behind it must not be seen. He could not quiet the conviction that the wall concealed not emptiness, but evidence. The townspeople's dreams, the mason's testimony, his own hearing of those deliberate knocks, all of it pointed to the same unspeakable possibility. The turning point came when the widow returned, the one who had begged for medicine to stave off her sleep. She was shaking, clutching a rosary so tightly her knuckles were bloodless. Through tears, she confessed she had dreamt again of the sisters, but this time they had whispered words she could understand. They begged her to open the earth. She swore she woke to find soil beneath her nails, though she had never left her bed. Hargrove calmed her as best he could, but her account carved deeper into his certainty. He began discreetly gathering testimonies from others, merchants, children, even soldiers passing through town. All described visions of women reaching upward, their faces pale with desperation. The stories differed in detail, but the essence was the same. The sisters were not gone. It was then that Hargrove realized the silence of Montgomery itself had become complicit. People feared to speak openly, yet their dreams betrayed them. Each household seemed to carry fragments of the same hidden truth, scattered like shards of a broken mirror. And as he pieced them together, a darker pattern emerged. The Mother Superior was not merely concealing absence, she was enforcing it. She controlled the narrative, reminding the town that silence was devotion. But Hargrove understood now that silence could also be obedience to terror. On a night heavy with rain, he returned once more to the convent wall. This time he brought a small hammer concealed beneath his coat, his rational mind battling with dread. As he lifted it, poised to strike, he whispered into the storm, "If there is someone beyond, give me a sign." For a heartbeat, there was only thunder. Then, unmistakably, 3 knocks answered him from the other side. The hammer slipped from his trembling hand as realization struck harder than any blow. This was no ghostly echo, this was will. Someone waited. The words tore at Dr. Elias Hargrove's reason like claws on glass. He bent to retrieve the hammer, but his hand shook so violently he nearly dropped it again. He could not strike, not yet, not without witnesses, not without certainty. For if he uncovered what he suspected, it would not only condemn the convent, but stain Montgomery itself with guilt too heavy to bear. The next morning, he met Reverend Matheson under the guise of routine consultation. He spoke in quiet tones, recounting the hammer, the knocks, the undeniable response. Matheson sat in rigid silence, his lips pressed as though to hold back both disbelief and horror. At last he whispered, "If you are right, Elias, then this is not just secrecy. It is a crime sanctified by scripture and shadow." They both knew what such an accusation meant. To question the Mother Superior was to challenge an institution older than either of them. Yet Hargrove could not shake the conviction that truth itself demanded voice. His journal filled with lines that felt less like medicine and more like prophecy. Burial is for the dead, not for the living. If silence has been forced, then silence itself is a wound. Meanwhile, the town's unrest deepened. Merchants spoke of sleepless nights. Children whispered of pale women lining the churchyard fence. Horses shied near the convent walls as if smelling something beneath the soil. Even soldiers billeted nearby grew restless, their dreams crowded with cloaked figures whose faces they could not name. The air carried dread like humidity, clinging to every breath. Hargrove's turning point came not from vision, but from evidence. A carpenter repairing a stable handed him a fragment of wood, claiming he had found it near the convent's refuse heap. It was splintered, yet on its surface, faint scratches formed what appeared to be letters. When Hargrove turned it under lamplight, he read them. A-M-E-N-N-O. The letters were uneven, desperate, as though carved by unsteady hands in darkness. He felt his stomach drop. The wood had not spoken of prayer, but of refusal. Whoever had carved it had not surrendered. They had resisted. That night, he gathered his resolve and began sketching a plan. He could not act alone. To breach the convent himself would mean ruin. But he could draw together a circle of townsfolk who, like him, had begun to doubt. He listed names: the mason, the carpenter, even the widow tormented by her visions. If silence had been imposed, then perhaps collective witness could break it. But even as he schemed, he felt watched. Passing the convent the next day, he caught the Mother Superior standing at the iron gate, her eyes fixed upon him with uncanny stillness. She did not call out, nor did she feign courtesy. She simply watched until he disappeared around the corner. That gaze carried the weight of warning, sharper than any spoken threat. Hargrove's analysis grew darker with each page of his journal. He began to note patterns not unlike a physician charting disease. Absence of sisters coincided with onset of collective dreams. Reports of knocks increased near storms when ground shifted. Objects bearing marks surfaced near the convent's waist. He underlined his conclusion. This is systemic, not chance, not madness, a pattern by design. Still, doubt gnawed at him. What if he mistook echoes of grief for evidence? What if hysteria shaped their visions, and the knocks were only soil resettling? But then he remembered the wood, the letters carved by human hands. That fragment was no dream. It was testimony. On a moonless night, standing alone at the convent wall, Hargrove whispered into the void, "If you are there, I will not abandon you." His words hung in the damp air, unanswered at first. Then 3 knocks came again, steady and deliberate. He closed his eyes, heart hammering, knowing he had crossed the threshold from suspicion into certainty. Dr. Elias Hargrove walked home that night with the rain soaking his coat and the knowledge pressing into him heavier than the storm. Certainty is a burden, he thought. For once a man admits truth to himself, denial becomes impossible. He could no longer claim the sisters had simply been reassigned, or that the town's dreams were born of grief. He knew. Someone remained within those walls, silenced by force, yet reaching outward with every desperate knock. His medical mind sought to steady itself with procedure. He began recording in clinical detail the progression of symptoms within Montgomery. Insomnia spreading like contagion. Children refusing to close their eyes. Adults murmuring half prayers in their sleep. He listed them as though each entry were a case study, but beneath the neat lines of ink, fear grew, uncontainable. The town was becoming not just witness, but participant, entangled in the silence of the convent. Days later, Hargrove was summoned unexpectedly by the Mother Superior herself. She greeted him with a strange courtesy, her eyes calm but unreadable. She claimed one of the novices had fallen ill and requested his examination. Inside the dim cell, he found a pale young woman seated on the bed, her eyes distant, her pulse erratic. She clutched her rosary so tightly it left marks on her skin. When Hargrove asked gentle questions about her health, she avoided his gaze, but he noticed something chilling. Beneath her sleeve, faint scratches trailed across her arm, not the kind inflicted by accident, but carved with deliberate care. They formed letters, though incomplete, as if she had been interrupted. He lifted his eyes to hers, and for the briefest moment she whispered a single word, so faint it might have been breath. "Beneath." Before he could ask more, the Mother Superior re-entered, her composure masking the tension in the air. She thanked him, dismissed the novice, and fixed her gaze upon him. "You see, Doctor, devotion often looks like affliction to those who do not understand." Her voice was soft, yet beneath it lay the steel of command. He felt then that she had summoned him not for healing, but for warning. That night, his journal bore a new line. "She is testing me. She wants to know how much I suspect." The next days confirmed it. Wherever he went, he felt the convent's shadow. The baker swore he saw a nun at his doorway, though none had entered. A soldier confessed he awoke with dirt beneath his fingernails. Each account wound itself into Hargrove's growing conviction, and yet the Mother Superior seemed unshaken, as though she held the town in the palm of her hand, her silence stronger than their fear. One evening, unable to resist, Hargrove deliberately returned to the convent wall and tapped lightly with his knuckles. He expected nothing. Instead, 3 knocks answered, steady as heartbeat. Then came something new. 4 knocks in reply, distinct, measured as if a message were being shaped. His breath caught. They were not only signaling existence, they were trying to speak. The realization rattled him. If a code existed, he could not decipher it alone. He needed help. But who could he trust without risking betrayal? He thought of Matheson, but feared the Reverend's loyalty to the church. He thought of the widow, but her fragile state might shatter under deeper revelations. Yet he knew he could not keep this to himself. Silence would make him an accomplice. That night he scribbled furiously, his candle burning low. "The voice of silence is not absence, it is defiance. They are telling me something, and if I cannot understand it, they will die unheard." He stopped writing only when he realized his hand trembled so violently the ink had splattered across the page. He stared into the flame, knowing a choice loomed before him. Remain silent and safe, or speak and invite ruin. For the first time, he understood the Mother Superior's game. She was not merely hiding the truth, she was daring him to pursue it, testing whether his conviction outweighed his fear. That night, Dr. Elias Hargrove could not sleep. He sat by the window of his study, watching the shadows stretch across the cobblestone streets, wondering whether his every step had already been anticipated by the Mother Superior. It was not concealment that defined her power, he realized, but challenge. She had constructed a wall of silence, daring him to break it, knowing that in doing so he would indict not only her but himself, accused of trespassing upon holy ground. By dawn he had resolved to act. If the sisters were still alive, or if proof of their fate lay hidden within those walls, he had to find it, but he would not go alone. He returned to Reverend Matheson, his words urgent and unsteady. Matheson, though hesitant, agreed to follow, citing not courage, but conscience. "If God condemns us for seeking truth," the Reverend murmured, "then perhaps we misunderstood him all along." Together they crept to the convent at nightfall, lanterns dimmed and tools hidden beneath their cloaks. The storm had broken earlier that evening, and the damp earth muffled their steps. Hargrove led Matheson to the corner where the plastered wall had replaced the chained door. To their astonishment, the plaster was still soft, as though hurriedly applied. Matheson crossed himself before striking with a chisel. Each crack of stone echoed through the silent halls, and with every fragment that fell away, Hargrove felt the weight of centuries pressing on his chest. Finally, after long minutes, an opening yawned before them. The smell that escaped was thick and damp, like air trapped too long in a sealed chamber. They lowered their lanterns into the gap. What they saw was not a room, but a passage, descending into darkness, its walls rough and unfinished. The faint echo of dripping water reached them, and with it, something else. Soft, rhythmic sounds, so faint they seemed less heard than felt. Hargrove's breath caught. The knocks had not been confined to one wall. They resonated from below. Cautiously, they descended. The passage twisted deeper until stone gave way to earth. Then they saw it. A small chamber carved crudely, lined with wooden boards. And on those boards, scratched in hurried, trembling hands, were words. Not prayers, but pleas. "We are here." Matheson nearly dropped his lantern. Hargrove pressed closer, his medical training forgotten, his heart thundering. Every line carved into the wood confirmed what he feared. This was not the resting place of the dead. This was the waiting place of the living. Suddenly, a sound rose behind them. Footsteps, deliberate and calm. The lantern light flickered across the chamber walls as the Mother Superior appeared at the mouth of the passage. She carried no weapon, only the authority of her presence. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and steady. "You should not have come here, Doctor. Some truths are not meant for the living." Her eyes gleamed with something between pity and triumph. Matheson, trembling, stepped back, but Hargrove stood rooted, caught between horror and defiance. He realized she had not tried to stop them sooner because she wanted this moment, wanted him to see, to know, and to bear the unbearable weight of it. His mind screamed for reason, but his voice emerged as a whisper. "Why?" The Mother Superior regarded him in silence, her face carved in shadow. Finally, she spoke with dreadful calm. "Because silence is the only devotion they had left to give." Hargrove felt the ground shift beneath his certainty. The chamber, the pleas, the scratches, they were proof of life withheld, of voices buried. Yet her words twisted the act into something else, a perverse offering cloaked as faith. And then, before he could speak again, the lantern flames guttered, plunging them into near darkness. The faint knocks returned, louder now, echoing through the chamber walls. The sound reverberated like a heartbeat, each strike against the hidden walls, pulling the air tighter around them. Dr. Elias Hargrove froze, lantern flickering in his hand, while Reverend Matheson clutched his rosary until his knuckles turned white. The Mother Superior did not flinch. She merely tilted her head, listening as though the knocks were not cries for help, but a hymn she alone understood. "Do you hear them?" Hargrove whispered, his voice strained. "I hear devotion," she replied calmly. "But you, Doctor, you hear only what your doubt allows." The reply chilled him more than the knocks themselves. It was not denial, it was reinterpretation, the twisting of evidence into ritual. He realized in that instant that her strength lay not only in control of the convent, but in her mastery of perception. To her, truth was not what happened, but what she decreed it to mean. Matheson's face betrayed the torment within him. Torn between faith and horror, he stepped back as if seeking distance from both men. Hargrove, however, stepped forward, his lantern light revealing more carved words on the wooden boards. "We are still here." His throat tightened. This was not metaphor, it was testimony. He turned on the Mother Superior, his voice breaking. "This is not devotion. This is imprisonment. This is cruelty disguised as prayer." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment the mask slipped. Something colder flickered there, a glimpse of steel will. Yet she did not shout nor strike. Instead, she spoke with eerie calm. If the world outside knew, what would they do? Tear down this house of God? Condemn every sister within its walls? You would not free them, Doctor. You would destroy them twice. Her words lodged deep. She was not pleading innocence. She was weaponizing guilt. And in Matheson's stricken expression, Hargrove saw the dangerous effectiveness of her reasoning. To expose her would unravel faith itself in Montgomery. To remain silent, however, was to participate in the burial. The knocks continued, relentless. Hargrove's heart pounded in rhythm with them. He thought of his niece's dreams, the widow's visions, the mason's trembling testimony. He thought of the fragment of wood carved with refusal, the novice who whispered beneath. None of them could be explained away. Yet the Mother Superior stood before him, daring him to act, knowing the weight of his conscience might collapse under the pressure of exposure. When at last she dismissed them, her tone was not angry but resolute. "You will return to your homes," she said, "and you will speak of nothing you have seen. To share this would be to wound souls more deeply than silence ever could." Hargrove and Matheson emerged into the night air shaken, their lanterns burning low. The storm had passed, but the sky hung heavy, as if the earth itself carried the weight of secrets too great to lift. Matheson muttered half-prayers, his faith fractured. Hargrove walked in silence, every step dragging under the knowledge that the town's suffering had a face, a name, and a keeper. That night he wrote in his journal with trembling hand, "Truth exists. I have seen it carved into wood, heard it echo in stone. But truth without proof is a shadow, and shadows are easily swallowed by silence." He set down his pen and pressed his palms against his eyes. He understood now why the authorities would not act, why even Matheson faltered. Without undeniable evidence, the convent's silence would prevail. What he had seen was enough to condemn in his heart, but not enough to rouse a town bound by faith and fear. And so he resolved, if the truth was to be heard, he would need more than testimony and dreams. He would need proof so undeniable it could not be twisted into devotion. The thought followed Dr. Elias Hargrove like a shadow, dogging every step he took through Montgomery's weary streets. The town was unraveling beneath the weight of silence. Merchants too tired to haggle, mothers clutching children who screamed at night, soldiers abandoning their posts in fear of dreams they could not endure. Yet still the convent stood untouchable, its gates locked, its halls cloaked in quiet authority. To accuse without proof would be folly. To act without allies would be ruin. Hargrove began to consider the unthinkable, breaking into the convent's inner chambers to secure what testimony alone could not provide. But he knew his path was dangerous, perhaps fatal, without someone he could trust. His mind turned again to Matheson, but the Reverend's faith hung too precariously between obedience and doubt. He needed someone outside the church's grasp. It was then he thought of Samuel Price, a former soldier turned gravedigger, whose work had given him a grim familiarity with both soil and silence. Price had heard the whispers too, had once confided that his dreams were crowded with voices calling from beneath the earth. When Hargrove approached him by the lamplight of the cemetery, the man's eyes glistened with recognition. "You've heard them," Hargrove said softly. Price nodded, his voice raw. "Every night, I dig for the dead by day, and by night they dig for me in my sleep." Hargrove shared his discovery of the hidden chamber, the carved words, the knocks that could not be denied. Price listened, his jaw tightening. If what you say is true, then they're not the dead I bury. They're the living no one will claim. His words struck like a verdict. Together they devised a plan. Price would help him return to the convent's buried passage, bringing tools not of healing but of excavation. But to move unseen, they would need distraction and risk. Before they could act, however, the Mother Superior struck first. One morning, Hargrove awoke to find his niece trembling, her eyes wide with terror. She had dreamt again, but this time the voices spoke with dreadful clarity. They had called his name. "Elias," she whispered, clinging to him. "They said you're next." The words chilled him. The Mother Superior had shifted her attention. She knew of his pursuit, and now the dreams themselves bore her warning. Silence had turned from passive concealment into an active threat. That night, as he walked home, Hargrove felt the certainty of eyes upon him. In every shadowed alley, every window half closed, he sensed her gaze. His own fear sharpened into resolve. If she meant to silence him, then he had no time left for hesitation. He met Price again beneath the cemetery's willow tree, their lantern light swallowed by mist. "She knows," Hargrove confessed. "If we delay, she'll make certain I join the silence I seek to break." Price gripped his shovel as though it were a weapon. "Then we don't delay." The two men set their plan for the coming night. They would return to the passage, break further into the earth, and uncover what lay hidden before the Mother Superior could erase it forever. Proof was no longer a matter of conscience. It had become a matter of survival. Hargrove returned home, but sleep offered no refuge. He dreamed of the convent walls collapsing, of pale figures pressing upward, of hands pulling at his sleeves, begging him not to fail. When he awoke, the echo of knocks still rang in his ears, louder than ever. He rose, gripping his journal like a weapon, and whispered into the darkness, "If proof is my only salvation, then I will dig until silence itself is broken." The words became Dr. Elias Hargrove's prayer and his curse as he and Samuel Price prepared their descent into the convent's hidden earth. Each hour that passed carried the risk of discovery, each glance over his shoulder a reminder that the Mother Superior's eyes seemed to stretch across the town like an invisible net. Yet fear had sharpened into urgency. Proof was not merely an obsession, it was the only way to break free from her tightening grip. They gathered their tools in silence, a lantern, a shovel, a small crowbar, and Hargrove's ever-present journal. Price's hands, calloused from years of grave digging, gripped the shovel with grim familiarity. "We dig careful," he muttered, "not just through earth, but through secrets men want left alone." That night, beneath the cover of mist, they slipped into the convent grounds. The silence of the place was suffocating. Even the crickets seemed hushed, as though the land itself bowed to the Mother Superior's command. Hargrove led them to the wall of fresh plaster, the place where he and Matheson had once glimpsed the passage. Price pressed his ear against the wall and stiffened. "Still there," he whispered. "They're waiting." With swift strikes, he loosened the plaster, each blow sounding like thunder in Hargrove's chest. When the last fragment crumbled, the dark passage yawned open once more. The lantern light flickered, illuminating claw-like scratches along the frame, marks left by desperate hands. They descended, the air growing colder, damper, carrying the weight of unspoken prayers. The deeper they went, the more the knocks returned, steady, insistent, like a coded summons. Hargrove's throat tightened. He tried to measure the rhythm to make sense of the pattern. 3 knocks, silence, 4 knocks, silence, then 3 again. It was deliberate. It was a language, At the base of the passage, they uncovered a wooden barrier sealed with crude nails. Price raised his crowbar, but Hargrove stopped him. He pressed his ear against the wood and recoiled. From the other side came faint murmurs, too weak to distinguish, yet undeniably human. His hand shook as he whispered, "They're alive." For a moment, neither man moved. The weight of the revelation pressed down harder than stone. This was no dream, no ghostly echo. It was living proof, breathing beneath the earth. Price's jaw tightened. If we break this open, the whole convent will know. Hargrove's mind raced. To reveal them too soon was to risk the Mother Superior sealing them deeper or silencing them forever. Yet to retreat now was unthinkable. He needed evidence that no priest, no soldier, no skeptic could dismiss. His journal would not suffice. He had to bring something tangible, undeniable into the light. He lowered his voice. "Not tonight. If we tear this down now, we lose everything. We need witnesses. We need more than words." Price reluctantly withdrew the crowbar, though his eyes burned with rage. "You're saying we leave them?" "Not leave them," Hargrove whispered. "Prepare for them. Save them right." They sealed the plaster back as best they could, disguising their intrusion. Yet the echoes of those faint voices followed Hargrove long after he returned home, lodging in his chest like a second heartbeat. That night he could not bring himself to write in his journal. His hands trembled too violently. Instead, he sat in darkness, remembering the Mother Superior's calm face, her unwavering composure. He realized then that she knew. She wanted him to hear, to edge closer, to carry the burden of knowledge without the strength to act. It was her cruelest weapon, forcing him to choose between silence and destruction. The next morning, a folded note appeared at his door, unsigned but unmistakable in tone. "If you value the life of your niece, you will cease your digging." Hargrove's blood ran cold. The threat was no longer hidden in dreams. It had entered his home. Dr. Elias Hargrove held the note in trembling hands, his chest tightening with the weight of realization. Until now, the menace of the convent had been cloaked in shadows and whispers, confined to dreams and unspoken suspicions. But here it was, folded neatly on his doorstep, invading the fragile sanctuary of his home. The message was short, but its implication thundered louder than any sermon. His niece was no longer just a dreamer haunted by visions. She was a hostage to silence. He rushed to her room, heart pounding, and found her sleeping restlessly, her brow damp with sweat. She stirred and murmured his name, clutching at his sleeve in her sleep as though she sensed the danger gathering outside her walls. Relief washed through him that she was unharmed, but fear followed swiftly. The Mother Superior had extended her hand beyond the convent gates. The line between church and town, between sanctuary and prison, had dissolved. By midday, Hargrove confided in Samuel Price, who reacted with fury. "She's marked you," Price growled. "You're not chasing shadows anymore. She's chosen you as her next silence." The words struck Hargrove deeply. He realized Price was right. The threat had shifted. No longer were the sisters the only victims. The Mother Superior had turned her gaze directly upon him, making him the next subject of her dreadful ritual. His obsession with uncovering proof had placed his family in danger, and perhaps that had always been her plan. He began to consider escape. Leaving Montgomery would protect his niece, perhaps even preserve his life. Yet to flee would be to abandon those still beneath the earth, voices knocking in the dark for someone to hear. Could he live with that silence trailing him to the grave? His journal bore the conflict in unsteady lines. To remain is death, to leave is betrayal. Either way, I become what she has made of me, an accomplice to silence. That evening, he heard the faintest sound outside his study window. 3 slow knocks, measured, deliberate. He froze, lantern light quivering across the pages of his journal. The sound came not from beneath the earth this time, but from the very wall of his house. He opened the shutters with trembling hands and found nothing but darkness. Yet the air carried the unmistakable scent of soil. The message was clear. The convent's silence could follow him anywhere. Desperation drove him to Matheson once more, but the Reverend seemed changed. His eyes were sunken, his words halting. "Perhaps," Matheson whispered, "the silence is not meant to be broken. Perhaps it is meant to be endured." His voice carried resignation, as though the Mother Superior's reasoning had burrowed into his faith. Hargrove left him, shaken and alone. That night, as he sat by his niece's bedside, he resolved that there was no retreat. If he did nothing, silence would consume not only the buried sisters, but also himself and his family. If the Mother Superior had marked him, then he would turn her mark against her. Proof was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was survival, a final chance to break her hold before he was swallowed into her ritual. He leaned close to his sleeping niece and whispered, "I will not let her take you." But even as he said it, he wondered if the choice was still his to make. The knocks came again, faint and rhythmic, echoing through the floorboards beneath his feet. And for the first time, he felt certain they were not only a summons, but a countdown. The realization burned through Dr. Elias Hargrove like fever. A countdown meant an end was coming. Whether for the buried sisters, for himself, or for the town, he could not know. Yet he felt in his bones that the time for hesitation had passed. Each knock now was not merely a plea for help, but a warning. The silence was closing in. Samuel Price found him the next morning, his expression grim. "I dreamed it too," he said without preamble. The knocks. They weren't asking anymore. They were counting. His voice carried a weight that left no room for doubt. Both men understood. The Mother Superior was no longer content to intimidate. She was preparing to act. That night, lanterns in hand, they made their way back toward the convent. Their plan was reckless, forged in desperation. Break open the wooden barrier beneath the earth, pull at least one living soul into the light, and force Montgomery to confront what lay hidden. Proof not carved in wood or whispered in dreams, but flesh and breath undeniable. The storm clouds above seemed to conspire against them, lightning splitting the sky as they slipped into the passage. The air grew thicker with every step, the knocks louder, more insistent, as though urging them forward. Price lifted his crowbar, jaw clenched, and drove it into the nailed boards. Each strike rang out like a bell of defiance, but before the wood could splinter, footsteps echoed down the passage. The lantern light wavered, casting long shadows as a figure emerged. Calm, deliberate, unyielding. The Mother Superior stood at the mouth of the chamber, flanked by two novices whose faces were pale, their eyes glassy with devotion or fear. "You force my hand, Doctor," she said softly, though her words carried like thunder. "You cannot claim you were not warned." Price raised the crowbar defensively, but Hargrove stepped forward, his voice raw with fury. "They are alive, and you know it. This ends tonight." The Mother Superior's calm did not waver. Instead, she gestured to the novices, who moved toward Price with eerie obedience. The chamber erupted into chaos. Price swung his tool wildly, lantern light crashing against stone, while Hargrove lunged for the wooden barrier. His hands clawed at the boards, splinters biting his skin, until at last one gave way. From the gap spilled a rush of damp air, and with it, a sound that froze him in place. A voice, weak, broken, but unmistakably human. "Help!" The word shattered the silence. For one fleeting moment, proof existed, undeniable. Price cried out in triumph, but his victory was short-lived. The novices struck at him with desperate strength. their devotion weaponized into violence. The lantern slipped, flame licking at the chamber's damp walls. Smoke rose, acrid and choking. Hargrove turned, his eyes locking with the Mother Superior's. For the first time, her mask cracked. Not fear, not rage, but satisfaction. She had wanted this confrontation, orchestrated it, knowing that in violence and fire the truth could be buried deeper than ever. The chamber filled with coughing and cries, the air thickening with smoke. Price staggered, blood on his brow, but still swinging. The voice behind the boards grew fainter, swallowed by the rising chaos. Hargrove clawed at the wood once more, but hands seized him, dragging him back. He struggled, but his strength faltered, his lungs burning. The Mother Superior's voice cut through the din, calm and merciless. "You cannot save them, Doctor. You cannot even save yourself." The last thing he saw before darkness overtook him was the lantern shattering against the stone, sparks scattering like dying stars across the chamber floor. When Elias Hargrove awoke, it was not to the damp chill of the convent's hidden chamber, but to the rigid smell of lime wash and the echo of iron doors clanging shut. His head throbbed, his chest burned with smoke, and his wrists bore the bruises of restraints hastily removed. He was no longer underground. He was inside a stark white room, lit too brightly, its walls bare but suffocating. For a moment he thought himself a prisoner of the Mother Superior, but then a new voice reached him, softer, measured. "You are safe now, Doctor. You collapsed during a fire. We moved you here for your recovery." It was not the convent. It was an institution on the outskirts of Montgomery, one he knew only by reputation. A place for the disturbed and the broken. Yet here he lay, treated as a patient, his warnings rewritten into delusion. The man who spoke introduced himself as Dr. Winthrop, the resident physician. His tone was kind, but his eyes weighed Elias like a specimen. "You raved of buried voices, of nuns clawing at the earth. It was smoke and fear, Elias. Trauma can conjure fictions that feel like memory." Hargrove tried to protest, to recount the words carved into wood, the voice that cried help, but every explanation only deepened Winthrop's indulgent smile. His testimony had been repackaged as madness, and in the silence that followed, Hargrove realized the Mother Superior's power had stretched further than he imagined. Not only could she bury the sisters, she could bury the truth by burying him. Days blurred into nights, marked by the monotonous rhythm of keys turning in locks, by attendants murmuring platitudes. Patients shuffled past in haunted silence, some rocking, some muttering, their fates indistinguishable from one another. Hargrove sat apart, writing feverishly in scraps of paper smuggled to him, trying to cling to reason. His words became both record and resistance. "They call this delusion. I call it evidence. If silence rules, then truth must whisper until it is heard." But the Mother Superior had not left him entirely alone. One evening, as dusk spilled pale across the barred windows, she appeared in the corridor beyond his cell. Her face, framed by the habit, was serene as ever. She spoke softly, just for him. "Do you see now, Doctor? Truth and madness wear the same mask when no one believes you. You need not fight anymore. Accept silence. It is easier." Her presence froze him. She did not linger, only left the echo of her words in the sterile air. That night, he dreamt again of the knocks, but they sounded different, slower, heavier, as if growing weaker. He woke with the dreadful thought that time itself was running out for those still beneath. Weeks passed and accidents began to unfold within the institution. A patient fell from a stairwell. Another vanished during the night, their bed stripped bare by morning. Whispers circulated among the inmates that shadows moved even after lights were extinguished. Hargrove's journal entries darkened. "If she has power here, then silence follows me even within these walls." One evening, an orderly slipped him a small, tattered book. "Found this in the convent," the man whispered nervously. "Didn't dare keep it." Inside were pages scrawled in cramped, desperate handwriting, prayers that turned into pleas, pleas that turned into names. It was a hidden record, a diary of those buried beneath, smuggled into his hands like contraband. It was proof, fragile but undeniable. Yet even as he clutched it, he felt the eyes of the Mother Superior watching, certain she knew. That night, he pressed the book to his chest, whispering into the dark, "If I fall, this will speak for me." Elias Hargrove repeated those words in his mind as though they might become a shield. The tattered book lay hidden beneath his mattress, its fragile pages more precious than gold. He read it each night under the dim glow of a contraband candle stub, tracing the desperate handwriting of the buried sisters. Their words were fractured, prayers dissolving into pleas, names etched like fading echoes. Proof, not carved wood or fleeting dreams, ink on paper, undeniable. And yet, he knew it was also a death sentence. The institution was no sanctuary. It pulsed with a quiet menace, accidents mounting with unnatural precision. A patient who spoke too loudly of shadows was found lifeless by dawn. Another disappeared entirely, their absence explained away by transfer. Hargrove recognized the pattern, silence imposed and rehearsed, following him even here. The Mother Superior's reach was long, her web threaded into the very walls that confined him. One evening, as attendants dimmed the lamps, Elias heard the sound again. Not knocks from beneath the earth this time, but a dragging step outside his cell, followed by a whisper through the bars. "Doctor?" The voice was hollow, strained, as though it belonged neither wholly to the living nor the dead. He leapt to the door, but the corridor was empty. Only the faint smell of earth lingered in the air. The visions among patients worsened. They muttered of veiled women walking the halls at night, of shadows that prayed without mouths to move. One man clawed his own arms, shouting that hands reached from the floor to drag him down. Hargrove tried to calm them, but his own faith in reason was unraveling. The book beneath his mattress confirmed the truth, yet the institution conspired to erase it. Then came the night he awoke to find a page missing. His hands shook as he rifled through the fragile book, realizing one of the pleas, one of the names, had been torn out. He confronted the attendants, but their blank stares betrayed nothing. The theft was a message. She knew he had the book. The following day, Dr. Winthrop visited, his tone gentle, too gentle. "Elias," he said, "you are exhausting yourself with fantasies. Relinquish the burden. Let us keep the journal safe for you." His outstretched hand was calm, but his eyes flickered with something else. Complicity. Hargrove clutched the book tighter, refusing. For the first time, Winthrop's voice sharpened. "Then you endanger yourself, and your niece most of all." The mention of her name cut deeper than any blade. How did they know she was the axis of his fear? Rage flooded him. That night, he scrawled furiously in his hidden notes, "She is not satisfied to bury voices. She buries those who try to carry them." The knocks returned again, faint, through the floor of his cell. They were weaker now, as though time itself was strangling them. 3 knocks, silence. 4 knocks, silence. The rhythm that had haunted him for months. He pressed his ear to the stone, whispering through clenched teeth, "Hold on, I will not let silence win." But his resolve wavered when he found another page missing the next morning. Someone was stripping the book piece by piece, erasing proof one fragment at a time. Soon there would be nothing left. He understood then that his only hope lay not in hiding but in escape. If he remained, both he and the sisters' voices would vanish into silence. He had to take the book, break the chains of the institution, and bring its testimony into the light of Montgomery. That night, he whispered to the shadows of his cell, clutching the book as though it were breath itself. If silence is her weapon, then my voice will be my rebellion. Elias Hargrove repeated those words until they became more than a vow. They became the rhythm of his breath, the beat of his pulse. The stolen book was no longer just testimony. It was his only weapon, the voices of the sisters pressed into fragile pages that could outlast him if he failed. Escape came in fragments shaped by desperation. Samuel Price, who had survived the fiery chaos of the convent, returned to him in secret, bribing an orderly with coin and whiskey to slip a key beneath Hargrove's mattress. "They'll kill you if you stay," Price whispered through the bars. "Or worse, they'll make you part of their silence." That night, Hargrove clutched the book to his chest and turned the key. The iron door groaned like a betrayer, each sound threatening to summon guards, but the corridor remained empty. He moved swiftly, his breath shallow, Price guiding him through back passages of the institution. Yet even in the dark, Hargrove felt eyes upon him, her eyes, watching, knowing, daring him to succeed or fail. They reached the gates, but escape was never meant to be simple. A figure emerged from the shadows, the Mother Superior, her presence unshaken, her face calm as though she had expected this moment all along. "You carry their words," she said softly, her gaze fixed upon the book. "But words are fragile, Doctor, easier to burn than bodies." Her hand extended, not in violence but in invitation. "Give it to me. Spare yourself and your niece the weight of carrying their burden." For one trembling instant, Elias nearly faltered. The weight of the book felt unbearable, its fragile pages threatening to crumble in his grip. To surrender would be to end his torment, to shield his niece from danger. But then he remembered the scratches carved into wood, the whispered help, the voices in dreams calling not only for witness, but for survival. He stepped back, clutching the book tighter. "Their silence is yours," he whispered, voice hoarse, "but their voices are mine now." The Mother Superior's expression hardened, though she did not move to stop him. She only whispered, "Then you have chosen your grave." Price pulled him away, forcing the gates open, dragging him into the cold night air. They fled through the fields, the convent's bells tolling behind them like a dirge. Every strike of the bell felt like a countdown, echoing the knocks that had haunted his nights. By dawn, Elias had disappeared from Montgomery. Some claimed he fled north with Price, carrying the book as proof. Others whispered he never made it past the river, that the Mother Superior's reach found him even beyond the town. No one knew for certain. What lingered was the silence. The convent remained untouched, its walls pristine, its hymns unchanged. Yet the townsfolk still dreamt of women pressing their palms against unseen walls, their mouths shaping words no ear could hear. Children woke screaming, merchants found soil scattered across their floors, and soldiers whispered of knocks that followed them even into battlefields. The silence had not ended, it had only spread. And as for Elias Hargrove, his name slipped into shadow. Some believed he died with the book clutched to his chest, buried in an unmarked grave. Others believed he lived on, carrying the voices from town to town, a wanderer marked by the weight of truths no one dared to claim. The journal he left behind, fragmented and water-stained, offered no resolution, only questions. Is silence the absence of voice, or the presence of power strong enough to crush it? Do the dead haunt us because they remain, or because we refuse to listen? The story of Montgomery remains unresolved, tangled between faith and cruelty, devotion and concealment. What is remembered is not clarity, but unease. The sense that silence itself is never empty, but filled with what we cannot bear to face. The events surrounding the convent of Montgomery linger still, suspended between testimony and denial. Were the sisters' voices truly buried beneath the earth, Or have they become part of the dreams that haunt those who dare to remember? Elias Hargrove's fate remains uncertain, and perhaps it is better that way. But what of us? When we hear silence, do we accept it as peace, or do we question what or who has been forced into it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Elias escaped with the book, or was he silenced like the rest? And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and stay with us, because often the truths we bury are far darker than the lies we tell.